want to welcome everybody back to this another discussion with Dr. Dawkins, Elder Dawkins from Macedonia SDA, right there in Fort Pierce, one of the group of churches with the Treasure Coast. As we have been talking about thus far health, and we have been using the mnemonic creation health. And just a quick reminder, remember the first thing that we mentioned as far as health is concerned is knowing the Creator. Knowing what your purpose is and that you were created. Then we talked about choice last week. We talked about the importance of choice as far as it comes in to being healthy. Why? Because I can give you a prescription, but if you don't choose to go and get it filled, or if you get it filled and choose not to take it, then of course it would not be of any benefit to you. And that's something that as a physician, I can tell you that does happen quite frequently. We call it non-compliance. So after C comes rest. C then R in the mnemonic creation. So today we're going to talk about rest. And to talk about rest, the first thing I want to point us to is that even in the Garden of Creation, or in creation, you're taught of rest. God created the earth in 7 days. And then when you read Genesis 2 verse 1, he said that he took some time to rest. If you think about even your own life, we come into this world as a babe and we learn all the skills that it takes to work. You can actually think of it that when we come in, the first thing we do is rest. We clutch onto our mom's breasts, we play around, we learn all the skills, and then finally, after going through the toddler stage, we become teenagers in school, and then eventually young adults, and eventually we work. When you look at that, it seems as if resting even before starting to work is important based upon the way that, of course, God created us. He created us. First day that we experienced was a day of rest, and then afterwards we started to work. What's the importance of rest? Well, there's a statement that says rest makes it possible for us to function at our best. Optimal rest includes getting a good night's sleep and taking time to relax daily, weekly, and annually. Life's stresses and pressures accumulate over time to create a generalized disease with life. Rest is a powerful antidote for the everyday challenges and difficulties we face. Rest, again, was created by God. After creating man in the Garden of Eden, the last thing he did to create the weekly cycle was take a day of rest. And I want to point out here, as I mentioned that one of the things that gives evidence of God being the creator and God being the one, the sovereign one, is that even till today, we still operate in a 7-day weekly cycle. And as I mentioned before, there's nothing scientifically that gives us that 7-day weekly cycle other than it goes back to the Bible, where it says that God created the heaven and the earth in 6 days and rested on the 7th day. So if you understand what that is saying, of course, is that God gave us a reminder, an anniversary. You don't have to wait for any special holidays. Every week, at the end of the week, you have a day that you can spend with God. Rest is powerful. It gives mind, body, and soul the power to be refreshed, rejuvenated, regenerated, and rebuilt. You find that it gives us a new start, a start over. One day may have been tough for you. Things go wrong. But you can always look for the night to come and the opportunity to have a new start. We have been kind of cycled where our bodies have been kind of programmed that, when night comes down, when the dark comes down, people tend to feel tired, especially if they're, diligently working. And of course, at that point, they rest. Sleep is essential for good health. Without proper rest, we forfeit the health benefits that nutrition and exercise provide. In fact, people who don't get enough regular sleep have decreased brain function and increased rates of disease and mortality. For optimal functioning, take advantage of the restorative effects of regular sleep. Now, that's important. I've had people come to the office and they complain of chronic fatigue. They complain of having headaches and being very agitated and having anxiety. And when you question them, when you do the history, sometimes they'll tell you that, because of circumstances, maybe it is the bills that they have to pay. But whatever it is, because of different issues, they are not getting enough sleep. Some are anxious because they're worried of various different things. And that takes away their sleep. And so they don't get that restorative rest that they need. And so they get up and their body suffers. There are many issues with health that happens when person fail to get the proper rest that they need. Physical rest, mental rest, and spiritual rest. Now, when you think about that, physical rest, we understand. That's, stopping to work. If you're a mechanic, if you're a construction worker, whatever it is, especially when you're utilizing, your muscles, you find that taking rest is important. This morning, I was working out. Well, it all depends on, of course, when you're listening to the program. But on Wednesday, I was working out. And after doing my jogging, went to the gym. And I started to kind of exercise the muscles, lifting a little bit of weight. And as I thought about it, I realized that I can do so much. But then after a while, I need to stop. Temperance is something that we'll deal with. Because after a while, you get fatigued. The muscles get fatigued. And when the muscles get fatigued, you can end up having issues such as like rhabdomyolysis. Again, that increases fatigue. And so at some point, physical rest then becomes important. Then mental rest. There are times when being in school, we would study for tests. We were up all night. Some people take things to enhance their ability to study. And of course, they end up paying for that. There are people who will drink coffee, take pills to stimulate because they're fighting the sleep. And many times they are successful, they're able to go through, but later on there's kind of a relapse where the mind just shuts down. So definitely you understand that that's not a place that we ought to be at any time, but there are those who of course challenge themselves. So mental rest is important. Now spiritual rest, that's now something that you have to consider. Take physical rest, we stop doing what we're doing. When we take mental rest, we stop doing what we're doing. Especially when you're sleeping, all of those things stop. Now spiritual rest, actually something that we continue to exercise. Resting in the Lord, for instance, being comfortable, content, going to church. You may come to church and, whichever church is it that you go to, and you find that you're busy doing things all throughout. But one of the things that never seem to happen is that you never seem to get fatigued when it comes on to doing spiritual things. You may be doing it and there's kind of a satisfaction. So you get kept in the place where you can continue to do for God. God is the one that keeps us in the first place. So sleep is important. 30 to 40% of people sleep less than 6 hours per night. Of course, that increases because you find that there's so many things to catch our attention. There are many people who you find that when it comes on to the time that they should be sleeping, they're on their cell phones or their gadgets, they're looking up their email, they're checking on the latest news that's coming in, and it's kind of a cycle. They leave from one to the other. And it keeps them up. And so you find that many people, as it says, sleep less than 6 hours per night, 30 to 40% in this study. There's different types of sleep. When people sleep, they start off in one stage and they go into another stage. There's a stage that we all should try to reach, and it's called the REM stage. It says, it usually first occurs about 90 minutes after you fall asleep. Cycles along with the non-REM stages during the night. Eyes move rapidly with eyelids closed. Breathing is more rapid, irregular, and shallow. Heart rate and blood pressure increases. Dreaming occurs. Arm and leg muscles are paralyzed temporarily. You find that that's one stage of sleep that, of course, takes some time, but that's where you want to reach. You can't get to one stage, of course, without going through all the stages. Stage 1, non-REM sleep, light sleep, easily awaken, muscle activity, eye movement, slow down. Then stage 2 is another non-REM. Eye movement stops, slower brain waves with occasional burst of rapid brain waves. And then you have stage 3, another non-REM, considered deep sleep, difficult to awaken, brain waves slow down more, but still have occasional rapid waves. Stage 4, non-REM, considered deep sleep, difficult to awaken, extremely slow brain waves. The benefit of adequate sleep and early sleep is something that we need to consider also. Many times we force ourselves to stay up, as mentioned. You find that things such as a game, people who like football or basketball, especially when they go into overtime, you find that, you just want to see the end. We know that it will be repeated. The scores will be repeated. Any highlights will be given. But you want to be the first to actually see all the events as it happens. And so we, sacrifice early sleep. But there are benefits to adequate and early sleep. There's a statement when I was younger that my mom used to say, it says the early bird catches the most worm. The early bird catches the most worm. People who were farmers and worked back in the days, you find that there were benefits when they got up early in the morning. Even the rooster was crowing. You get up at that time and you start the day, you find that you're typically able to get all the things that you need to be done early. and have a certain period of time during the day to even take a rest. How much sleep would one say is enough? Well, studies say that 7 to 8 hours a night is best. And that's a study, you can look it up, the Alameda study. Too much can cause to be detrimental to you. So, oversleeping is, of course, not something that is good. And depend on the age, there are certain important differences that causes some to sleep more and some to sleep less. For instance, preschoolers, 3 to 5 years, 11 to 13 hours is usually recommended. School-age children, 5 to 12 years, 9 to 11 hours. Adolescents, 8 to 9 hours. So you find that, of course, all these timelines, while the study says those are the adequate or the optimum, they're being challenged because, again, technology is eating away at their ability to want to sleep and sometimes even to find sleep. There's no wonder that when you start to look at the schools today and the children, the young people, you find that a lot of things are not as it used to be. Many don't have the ambition that their previous generation had. Their ability to concentrate decreases. Why? Because when you look at commercials, for instance, there's a certain timeline. It gives you a bunch of information in a short period of time and then it switches. So your attention switches very quickly. And young people today, they're able to deal with that, but then it decreases their ability to concentrate, especially when it comes down to things that are very important. Adequate sleep is important. At least 7 hours of sleep, starting early, before 12, for instance. Human beings are built to be daytime creatures. It's hardware into our circuitry. When you deliberately try to shift the sleep-wake cycle, it's like having a symphony with 2 conductors, each one beating out at a different time. Your delicate internal rhythm go haywire. You need to treat sleep as a precious and fragile thing. Now, as a physician, I can tell you that that's true. I experienced this when I was in school, working, especially as a resident, where, you had to be up in some rotations all night. As a matter of fact, I can give you an experience. University of Miami, when I worked at Jackson, they used to call it like the knife and gun club at the trauma center. I mean, those who know Miami knows, what it used to be like. And I remember on the weekends when I was on call, you'd be extremely busy with patients coming in. And one of the things I had to do just to be able to survive is I would come in, I would round early, see all the patients by 12 o'clock. Then I'd go into one of the rooms that's reserved for the students in residence, turn off the light and try to sleep. Why? Because I know that once night started, the action started. That's how I tried to, that's what I tried to do to be able to overcome. Now, I can tell you that while I was able to sleep, it was not as satisfying a sleep as if I was sleeping in my own bed at night and going through all the different stages of sleep. Early bird, sleeping early, as I mentioned, gets the worm, is associated with more regularity in social interaction, eating, physical activity, and recreation. All these things improve. Subjects deprived of sleep from 3 to 7 a.m. experience nearly a 30% drop in immune function. These are things that we actually don't think of. We're not mindful of it, but it happens. When you miss sleep, your immune function decreases. You're more liable to get illnesses, upper respiratory illnesses. You're more liable to even have to deal with cancer. Your immune system is affected. Subject deprived of sleep from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. experience nearly a 50% drop in immune function. There's also an impact on academics. Those who sleep early, they typically have higher GPAs, higher scores on exams, higher grades, higher academic performance. All these things are payoff for actually going to bed early. Now, this is just some of the things, of course, that are beneficial when you consider rest. And of course, this is a daily rest. The day to work, the daylight, you work in, and of course the night, you go to sleep. As mentioned before, we were created by not chance, but a great designer, one who knows us more than even we know ourselves. Mentioned that the Bible itself is our manual. And so here it is, he separated the day and the night. He made light, even from beginning, even before you had the moon and the stars, he created light. That was the first day of the week. It wasn't until the fourth day that he put the stars and the sun and the moons in place. So he knows us, and he tells us, of course, work while there's light, because the time cometh when no man can work. There are other different things in the Bible that speaks about working and walking in the light. In Psalms, it says, thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Again, giving us the mindset that there's benefits to light, and that's when we should take time, if possible, to do the activities that we need. Of course, we can't see at night unless we have light to cause us to see. Deep restorative sleep is considered a restorative part of the sleep that is necessary for feeling well rested and energetic during the day. If we don't reach that stage, you'll find that when we get up in the morning, we'll still feel drowsy, we won't feel energetic, and we'll actually know that there is something that is missing. As mentioned, there are hormones that the body produces. We talk about the impact on the immune system, but you also have hormones such as melatonin. And for those who have issues with sleep, I'm sure that's one of the things that you've already tried. You go to the store and you're looking for something to help you to sleep, and one of the things that they tell you is naturally produced by the body is melatonin. Also, you find that there are many people, because of issues with sleep, they have to take also other kind of drugs. They'll take Benadryl, for instance. Now, Benadryl is not actually for sleep. They use it for different things such as allergies, itching, rash. But because of the side effect, we know that it makes you drowsy. And so we capitalize on the side effect, and so people use it for sleep. So you'll find that they'll combine Benadryl with stuff like Tylenol or Motrin. They'll combine it with stuff and say, okay, this is a sleep aid. But the truth is that it's not really a sleep aid, but the side effect is that it makes you drowsy, and so people will sleep. It's not the best as far as giving you a restorative sleep, because many people after taking this will come up and say, they're still feeling drowsy. Also, to point out that satisfaction and being content is something that also helps us with the ability to rest. Why do I mention that? Because as I'm speaking here about sleep, I think about Michael Jackson, somebody that, most people who are listening is aware of. Who is Michael Jackson? It was, they said, the king of pop. Now, realize that Michael Jackson died because of his inability to get restful sleep. The reason he died was because he had a doctor there that was supposed to put him to sleep and was using a medication, and apparently wasn't following up, and he ended up just sleeping and still hasn't woken up yet. The Bible says that a thief hides, runs when nobody is running after them, that evil person. So you find that when people are involved in certain things, they have to be aware. Drug dealers, people who are murderers, people who are whatever the crime that they're involved in. Because of that, they may be sleeping or trying to sleep, and they hear a siren, and all of a sudden everything is stimulated. So contentment is, of course, needed to have a good sleep. We'll talk about nutrition at some point. Also, you find that people who will eat late at night, the stomach is working. Many times they'll get dreams and nightmares. Why? Because the body is not at rest. It can't rest because it's still working. So there are many things that affect sleep. So melatonin the body produces, it decreases cognitive deterioration in individuals with Alzheimer's. It may help manage elevated blood pressure in men and women, fights a wide array of cancers, precursors to good sleep, highest during normal hours of sleep, increases rapidly in the late evening, peaks after midnight, and decreases towards morning. It says light at night impacts the release of melatonin. There are people who like to sleep with light, especially lights that has very high lumens. They'll fall asleep with that, but it affects your melatonin. When you wake up, you're not in the mode of feeling extremely restful, and so you find that the best light is actually light that you'd say natural. If you want a good sleep, I can just imagine, and I'm sure you can imagine with me, being in the woods, dark, or if you have any light, it's the moonlight. Think about what it would have been like in the Garden of Eden. No building over you. Adam is there. The trees were what covered him. You had the birds. You had the night animals that would be chirping, and the cricket, and you're there, and you're experiencing all that God gives, and it's almost like soothing you to sleep. Well, that's the best type of light. We had what they call little blinkies. I'm sure there's another name for it, but they would little insects that would fly around, and they would shine light. That's the type of light. But the natural, the artificial light that we use, of course, decreases that. Then there are other hormones. I won't get necessarily all into it, that the body releases. There's hormone that the body releases when it's time to stimulate you. So you find that in the morning after sleeping, the body kind of nudges you and say, okay, it's time to wake up. You get certain stress hormones that increases. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why sometimes people get heart attacks in the morning is because the body's being stimulated, the heart rate increases, the blood pressure increases. It's almost like you're getting a holy push. And of course, if you have a bad heart, you could, be subjected to having a heart attack at that time. How to shift your schedule? There are many people who, because of different circumstances, they end up not being able to sleep early and not being able to stay asleep. So there's certain hygienic things that you should do. Simple things. Clean yourself before you sleep, meaning, take a shower, warm shower. When you go into the bed, turn off all the lights. There's something that people who have issues with sleep that they may follow and it may help them. Take the television out of the room. There's sleep therapists who will say, the bedroom is just for sleeping and for sex. And so you take that out so you're not tempted to be stimulated, that the mind can truly be at rest. And then be consistent. Be consistent, meaning that at all possible, you go to bed about the same time each night. Now, sometimes that's difficult with people who have shift works. There's sometimes people who work at places where you're on the morning shift, another time you're on the evening shift, and another time you're on the night shift. And, we understand all those things. But as much as possible, you try to keep the same timeline. And there are people who, because they're always working at night, nurses, for instance, they tend to sleep during the day. It's still not as refreshed because you find that people who have to sleep during the day, they typically get a shorter sleep. Why? Because there are many things that disturb them during the day. The doorbell ring, kids come home from school, and so they may get fewer hours, but that's somewhat kind of expected. And it's, again, still not the best for them, but, you have to make do. Inadequate sleep, as I mentioned, keep that in mind, as repeating, affects the immune system. Now, there's certain medical things that also can affect sleep. People have diseases such as sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is where the person is trying to sleep and then all of a sudden the windpipe gets cut off and they stop breathing, almost like they're being strangled, and their body stimulates them to where they actually wake up. So these people will sleep few hours, some, depending on how severe it is, they may sleep a few hours and then wake up, or they may sleep, every 30 minutes they're waking up. They don't actually get up completely to go and do things. Sometimes they don't even realize that they're going through this process, but they're having naps and waking up and never actually get to the sleep, the stage of sleep, the deep sleep that they're striving to get to. And that would require treatment. And you find that there's increased risk when a person is not getting rest because of conditions such as that. They get high blood pressure, continue to gain weight, heart attacks, strokes, all of these things. So sleep is very important, very important. Then you have other types of rest. When you look in the Bible, you find that in addition to the nightly rest, we mentioned at the beginning that God gave us a weekly rest. Now that's important because you find that resting weekly, and then not only weekly, in addition, God gave different festivals, of course, which included rest. These things help overall to maintain the person's relationship, bringing them to a point where, they are content. It also helps them to not be owned by, and when I say owned, not being driven by the love of money. Let's put it that way. Because there are people who, because of the love of money, for instance, they'll work continuously. I remember in the office, somebody came and they were complaining about how they were tired and fatigued, and they were asking for help medically. And when I asked them, just with the history, what type of work do they do? How many days do they work? You'll be surprised. There are people who work continuously, 7 days a week. Now, if God himself rested on one day, on the seventh day, then why do we think that we who are, mortal can continue to work without stop? You find that day, taking that day, knowing that, at this day, I'm not going to worry about bills. I'm not going to worry about being the employer. I'm not going to worry about anything. I'm just going to focus on my spiritual rest. It gives us a feeling where when the new week starts, you're ready to go. You have many things, including life in its right perspective. You realize that you don't live to work, you work to live. And there are certain things that you put at a full stop to receive that spiritual blessing. Why is that important? Now, you find that there are many aspects to health: physical, mental, and spiritual. And it comes to a point in time where we realize that the most important aspect is our spiritual health. Why? Because the Bible itself says, appointed unto us once to die, and after that, the judgment. So death is pronounced upon us. We were born with a death sentence. And the only way to be content and comfortable is knowing when you have full insurance on everything. If your hurricane is passing by and you have insurance on the house with 100%, no deductible and everything is covered, you don't worry as much. And so when you're spiritually connected, when you know that you're resting in God, you realize that, you may be diagnosed with cancer. You realize that things may occur mentally, things that would cause you to be stressed and depressed. But when you know that you have that insurance, you find that you're able to weather the storm, knowing that whatever happens, there is better to come. Why? Because you're insured. And who are you insured with? You're insured with the one who created you. You're insured with the one who made you, as saying the same. And so you have nothing to worry about. And so that's the importance, of course, of that weekly rest. What do you do on that weekly rest? Well, you go and you learn more about the one who created you. That's what God did for Adam and Eve. After creating them in the cool of the day, he would actually go and fellowship with his creature. Importance of rest. It's actually part of being healthy. You rest and you find that you will have better longevity. Many people today, can't even fathom what retirement would be like. And when you look at people who are at the point of retirement and people who have retired, you'll find that many times they work even harder than when they were actually gainfully employed. But there's a difference mentally. Why? Because they work because now they love what they're doing versus they work because they have to take care of bills and responsibility. So they have a mental rest, even though they're physically out there doing the same thing. There's a example I want to give as far as that's concerned. I was driving out of my house not too long ago. And I remember as I was driving, I saw a bunch of men walking around picking up trash. I had to stop and take a picture of it. These were older men who were retired. They live in a gated community. They had the little thing picking up trash, and I stopped and I was looking at them and I was just marveling. While they were picking up trash, they were talking, fellowshipping with each other. And it just came to me. I said, look at the perspective here. Another perspective is when people are locked up and incarcerated, one of the punishment that they end up having to go through is some of them, depending on where you are, they have to go out and pick up trash. And when they're doing that, those who are out there, for them, it's an embarrassment. For them, they're trying to hide their face. For them, they detest that. They're upset. The hormones that are being released are that of, adrenaline, epinephrine, and, the hormones that stimulates anger. And yet still, the gentlemen that were walking around in my community, picking up and smiling, and the same exact job, but a different reaction if you were to analyze the body and the mind. So you find that when you do everything in its rightful perspective, rest when you ought to rest. And we'll come to a point where we'll talk about activity. Remember, we're talking about creation. So CRE, exercise, we'll deal with that the next time. But when you do everything in its right proportion, you'll find that God blesses you and he keeps you. And so I want you to consider that as you go to bed tonight. Are you getting the right amount of rest? As you go through the week and come to the end of the week, are you taking that spiritual rest? And if you do what God says, he's the one that gives us the guarantee that we will see the benefits of rest. Be blessed.
We walk with the Lord in the light of his word. What a glory he sheds on our way. While we do his good will, he abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Not a burden we bear, not a sorrow we share, but our toil he doth richly repay. Not a grief nor a loss, not a frown or a cross, but is blessed if we trust and obey. there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. But we never can prove the delights of His love until all on the altar we lay. For the favor He shows and the joy He bestows are for them who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Then in fellowship sweet we will sit at His feet, or we'll walk by His side in the way. What He says we will do, where He sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. Trust and obey.